Welcome to Season 2 of the Cryptopulse podcast, your ultimate guide to the world of crypto, Bitcoin, and world economics. We're here to guide you through the crypto universe with thought-provoking topics, in-depth knowledge, and information to help you make informed decisions. We'll also be interviewing some of the best minds in the industry, such as CEOs of crypto projects, traders, economists, authors, and development teams from around the globe. And now for the episode.
Hello and welcome back to the Cryptopulse podcast for another one of our episodes about crypto and macroeconomics. This time, we're addressing a very interesting topic about the Lightning Network. Ben, we've been asked a lot about this, so we thought we'd do a whole episode dedicated to it.
Yeah, we have indeed. It's a question we get asked often by people that are just learning about Bitcoin and people that ask about Bitcoin and its payment properties. And for lots of people that have perhaps used the Layer 1 Bitcoin network for payments, they will have noticed that transactions are sometimes very slow. They require a lot of confirmations, and that doesn't really make for a good payment system. And so the Lightning Network was born. And as you say, we're going to deep dive into what that is today.
You're right, it doesn't make the best payment system. However, it makes a better payment system for international transfers of large amounts of value compared to things like PayPal or Western Union or banks. So whilst it's not the fastest, it can't really be used for day-to-day spending. But anyway, that's what we're going to get into, so I won't ruin the punchline. So let's just give you some context to start off with. So Bitcoin has written in its own code whereby every 10 minutes, a block can be mined and added to the blockchain. Now, these limitations, as we've just discussed, have led Bitcoin to have around a maximum of 7 transactions per second. To make comparison, Visa processes routinely about 2,000 transactions per second with peaks of several dozens of thousands. So it's not scalable in that respect. Since miners are the ones capable to build and add a block to the blockchain, this low throughput allowed them to impose higher fees in times of great demand, which is again a problem for smaller payments. The most emblematic example occurred in 2017, which I remember well, when fees skyrocketed from an average of less than $1 per transaction to several dozens of dollars. So no good if you're sending $10 to somebody.
Yeah.
Several attempts have been tried in order to increase throughputs and lower latencies. For instance, in November 2017, soft fork occurred in the Bitcoin's blockchain with the implementation of segregated witness, known as SegWit, which is a concept in which data is segregated to create more space for more transactions to be added to the blockchain. It quadrupled the number of transactions that is possible to aggregate in one block. Another example occurred in August 2017 with the hard fork that created Bitcoin Cash, which increased the 1 megabyte block size limitation to between 8 and 32 megabytes, thereby enabling the processing of more transactions per block. Now, Bitcoin Cash is, again, another topic we could go into on a completely different episode, because of its philosophical differences between regular Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. And I'd absolutely love to do an episode on that, because I've been thinking about that an awful lot. And whilst Roger Ver famously was spearheading the Bitcoin Cash fork, I think the guy must have been under a lot of pressure and got quite a lot of abuse online. So I'd actually like to talk to him one day about his philosophy around creating Bitcoin Cash, because I think there's some things that can be learned there. I don't necessarily agree with it completely, but I do think there's some value in discovering more about why that was done. So anyway, in the midst of all of this, the Lightning Network was born.
Yeah, I was going to say that a lot of the debate between Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin is, as you say, quite philosophical in terms of how the end user uses the payment feet. It doesn't really make much difference. I mean, whether you're using the Lightning Network or Bitcoin Cash, as long as the payment can be made quickly and securely, the rest is sort of being debated at a kind of a more philosophical level. But let's get into what the Lightning Network actually is. So the Lightning Network is a layer 2 payment protocol laid on top of Bitcoin, with the goal being to make Bitcoin transactions instant, inexpensive, and more private. So the concept was first proposed by Joseph Poon and Theodoros Drija in 2016 and has been under development since then. So how does it work? Well, first, let's first recognize that whenever someone makes a transaction, it doesn't need to be recorded in a blockchain network to be valid. Sure, if we want a transaction recognized instantly by the world, it would have to be recorded in a distributed public ledger. But if I were to register a private transaction, the same rules do not apply. If two people want to record a transaction between them for internal use, it is enough to simply write out and then sign what transaction could be sent to the Bitcoin network. So since both parties keep a copy of the transaction, they both understand the security of Bitcoin and recognize that if the transaction would be sent out, then the funds would be transferred. And the existence of this transaction record is enough for internal use. So this is similar to how traditional financial contracts usually work. So if you sign an employment contract with an employer, it's likely that a court never saw that contract. A lawyer possibly consulted, but they didn't enter it into court records. But since both parties in the contract know they could go to court at any time, the contract is enough to serve as a legally bound agreement between the two parties. And the Lightning Network operates on this idea of internal peer-to-peer transactions that are backed by the Bitcoin blockchain.
It's an innovative idea, isn't it? And I do understand the pushback that came from the Bitcoin Cash community, because the whole idea was it was supposed to be using a blockchain, and they didn't really want a kind of another layer or maybe a barrier to entry for people, which I think the Lightning Network could have if you had enforced KYC and things like that. So anyway, that's probably another discussion for another time.
Probably is.
But how does this work? Let me give you an example from a third-party perspective. So if Kevin wanted to send Ben some Bitcoin, both Kevin and Ben would have to set up a payment channel between them. So to do this, both parties would have to deposit some amount of Bitcoin each into a multi-signature address. Let's say in this example, both deposit 5 Bitcoin. Wow. Okay, ballers.
That's a substantial deposit, yeah.
Just a couple of Bitcoin. This address is essentially a wallet that requires both Kevin and Ben's keys to open. Now that the payment channel is set up, we can both send Bitcoin between each other to our heart's content without consulting the Bitcoin network. Either party could send a transaction that could close the payment channel. So let's say, Ben, you send me 5 Bitcoin. If that happens, either party could take this closing transaction to the main Bitcoin network to have it processed. But neither need to do this, as they want to keep their payment channel open and accept more transactions. In this way, the Bitcoin network provides stability to the Lightning Network, and yet for most transactions, the Bitcoin network doesn't need to be consulted. Finally, when either party wants to leave the Lightning Network, they can close the channel by executing the most recently constructed transaction on the Bitcoin network. This will close out their virtual tab and finalize all their transactions in a real public ledger. When it comes to security, the Lightning Network does have a few important features that deter bad actors. For example, if I left the payment channel as soon as it was set up, it does not lock away both mine and Ben's Bitcoin into the void forever. Before the money is transferred into the shared payment channel, both users will sign a reverse transaction that closes the channel. This transaction, if chosen to be executed, will close the channel and transfer the initial payment back to both users. In the event either one leaves abruptly, the other could produce this transaction and close the channel unilaterally.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. It's very similar to what happens in traditional finance, right? I mean, this is how the Visa network operates. Is that they create a log of the transaction. So when you go into a retail store and you put your debit card in or your credit card in to create a transaction, you know, the Visa network is only making a log of that transaction. They're not automatically debiting that sum of money from your bank account. That still takes 2 or 3 days for actual clearance. And the merchants will tell you that, you know, the money doesn't land in their bank instantly. They have to wait for the next batch to be processed. So I think in this way, actually, the layer 1 is the layer 2 on the Lightning Network is only doing what what has already been done in traditional finance, but for the blockchain network. And it does make sense, because what you want really is a strong and stable, I think that was a phrase that was used
All right, Theresa.
during a political campaign. Yeah. But you want a really strong, stable layer one network that sort of batch receives these contractual agreement and process them on the layer one, but actually leave it to the layer twos to do all of the heavy lifting when it comes to quick transactions. I know there's been a lot of debate around this, but I've actually used the Lightning Network and it's super efficient. And of course, there are some additional security things that have to be thought about, but these problems have already been come up against in the traditional finance sector, and I'm sure that it can be done in a way that prevents people from losing their money.
Definitely.
Okay, so should we get on to something called revocation secrets?
Let's do it. It sounds interesting.
Okay, it does. So a revocation secret is basically a key that's generated privately by both parties when a transaction is constructed. So when a new transaction is printed between the two users, they reveal their revocation secret for the previous transaction to each other. Now, if either person tries to execute a prior transaction, the other user can produce the revocation secret and take not only their share, but the malicious actor's share as well. So there's also some additional logic in revocation secrets that if I were to execute a prior transaction, the network blocks me from receiving that money for 24 hours, and it would give you enough time to spend the money, and I would end up losing it all. So this is one of the downsides of the Lightning Network, as you would have to keep an eye on the blockchain for revoked transactions. But luckily there are third-party watchtowers that can do this for you and notify you when such a revoked transaction is spotted. So it's great. It means that you and I can send each other Bitcoin, and if one of us cheats and executes an old transaction, then we are punished by the other party getting basically the other's share.
Incentive for good behavior there.
Yeah, it is. And it does seem like a lot of effort if you wanted to send multiple different transactions to different people. So think about all the transactions you would make on an average day. It would be a costly pain to create independent payment channels for all of those separate transactions. But there is a solution, which is called chaining.
So let's say I want to buy some coffee from a local cafe and I don't have a payment channel set up with them, but Ben does. I could then send Bitcoin through Ben's channel and buy his flat white without having to trust Ben. So how is this done? Well, like revocation secrets, additional logic is added to the transaction contract that makes sure that Ben only receives money if he pays the coffee shop, which is pretty cool. Ben would then pay the coffee shop, get a receipt for the payment, and then be able to claim the money lost from me. Okay, so Ben is happy to pay the coffee shop. Thank you very much. As a first payment is guaranteed from the initial contract. But how can Ben be sure that the coffee shop will give him proof of payment after he pays? Well, he does this by setting up a similar transaction contract with the coffee shop that locks the funds up unless he receives the proof of payment.
Well, I'm glad all of this stuff is going on under the hood. I mean, the whole thing feels very, very slick.
Imagine if you actually had to do this manually. You'd be like, damn it, this is never going to catch on.
Well, of course, back in the day with conch shell payments, I mean, I'm pretty sure with the invention of credit and lending, it probably was all manual. It was all sort of like manual entries into a book. But yeah, finally, then we'll get on to the importance of blockchain builders. So Bitcoin is obviously the most traded cryptocurrency. Its future of mainstream adoption, however, is in the hands of developers building on top of Bitcoin. Imagine if every Visa card could only take 7 transactions per second globally. Nobody would use it. But thanks to the Lightning Network, it has the potential of handling up to 1 million transactions per second. And I doubt the developers had in mind how important their work would become. And I doubt that they could predict situations like El Salvador, where dozens of citizens and tourists use the Lightning Network to pay for taxis groceries, restaurant bills, and other sort of living expenses. So a lot of the younger generation are walking away from credit cards and service like Western Union now with its exceptionally long settlement times, and are warming up to the idea of Bitcoin, not only for sending transactions, but also as a hedge against inflation. And as our wonderful guest, Greg Foss, said, as an insurance against the fiat debt spiral.
The DEBT spiral. Sorry,
the DEBT spiral. Yeah, it's becoming quite a catchphrase. But it matters more and more as the price of living goes up, and people want to make sure that their money won't be devalued. Demand will grow as education grows, and innovation will be accelerated by those building on blockchains like Bitcoin. And I think for Bitcoin to work, I think for it to work in the way that we hope it does, I hear it being called lots of different things. Most recently, I've heard people describing it as the people's money. And for it to function as a monetary system, we have to be able to use it for payments. And as you said at the top of the show, for sending international remittance, it's phenomenal because there is no third person, there's no middleman, you're not having fees cut out at multiple different levels. Sometimes with companies like Western Union, you could send money from, Australia to Pakistan, and that money will have touched 4 different service providers that will all have taken a cut. And it's not unheard of to sort of have 35-40% fees on money that's being sent, which is just catastrophic for developing nations, but also for people that want to, send money to friends and family to support them in developing countries. So, yeah, Bitcoin is great for that, but I believe that for us to sort of unlock the next level of adoption, it's got to be useful as a day-to-day payment system, and the coffee shop example is just perfect for that. When you want to send a small amount quickly in a trusted way and know that the transaction is secure and reliable, I think that then becomes something which is a valuable unit of currency.
And I know we've explained a lot about how things happen, like, as you called it, under the hood. And I think it's kind of important to understand this. But in reality, if you download a Lightning Network wallet, there's loads available on the Android and the Apple Store. When you use it, you don't know about all of that stuff that happens. It's just a bit like that. I don't know which kind of protocols we're using now to talk over the internet and on video, and not, and how all of this works. It just works, and that's what I really like about the Lightning Network. It just works, and it works really well. And you've got companies like Coin Corner who are based out the Isle of Man, but they've got Lightning Network point of sale equipment, and they provide a merchant service. And I've seen people like paying for coffees and stuff in Gibraltar. I've seen people in Africa. In fact, Anita Posh has been using the Lightning Network when she's been showing people how to use Bitcoin in emerging economies. So it's really amazing. It's a really amazing piece of technology. And I love the way that the usability of it is simple and straightforward. It's easy to get. You don't need to know all of this stuff that's happening behind the scenes. But, a lot of our listeners want to know like a little bit more about actually how does this work, and is it still decentralized? Can it still be trusted? Is it safe, and all of those things?
Yeah, well, I would challenge anybody that is concerned about the complicated nature of the Lightning Network to tell me how any of their apps work on their phone. We're every day we engage with social media apps, banking apps, and there's so much going on behind the scenes that we just don't understand. The important thing for adoption, of course, is just that the app works and it's quick and it's efficient and it is secure. And I think that that's what the Lightning Network developers are working towards. And there are plenty of intellectual capital that's moving into the Lightning Network specifically. We've got Jack from Twitter that is now building and throwing, lots of his resources at this. I really do see this being one of the payment systems for the future, because the internet now is such a global place of commerce, and especially with the advent now of the metaverse technology and VR, I think we are going to need a trusted payment system that is relatively decentralized. And I think the Lightning Network could be that thing. but time will tell.
Yeah, and let's also, a good note to finish on, really, I think, is the use of Bitcoin and the Lightning Network for people that are unbanked. And we used to talk about this a lot in the last season of the podcast. In 2017, the World Bank reported there are 1.7 billion unbanked adults, meaning that these individuals did not have an account at a financial institution or through a mobile money provider. And there's many different reasons for that. It might, they might be discriminated against from a, human rights or political perspective. They might just not live in a nation where the banking system is widely available. They may not have the required set of IDs. Maybe they're of no fixed abode. So this is really important. So I think it's gonna open up opportunities to generate income and wealth for those that haven't been able to do that before because of the way that the existing banking system doesn't serve them. And therefore, I think it's really important that things like KYC just don't enter the frame when it comes to having things like Lightning Network wallets. It's because otherwise we're just going to have exactly the same situation where it just serves the people that actually need it the least and not the most.
Yeah, you're right. We've spoken about how this could happen as well. We've obviously got the Apple App Store, which is an incredibly centralized platform, and US governments or European governments could pressure Apple into insisting on KYC for Lightning Network wallet apps that are downloading to iPhone. That would immediately require hundreds of millions of people, if not billions of people, to KYC their Lightning Network wallets. But the great news is that there are lots of different ways to do this. It can be done through a web browser. There are ways to do it that doesn't necessarily require an app on the phone. So I don't personally see that happening. I think we're some way off that regulation even being looked upon. But yeah, as you say, I think the more open we can keep this without the requirements of KYC, I think that this can only support developing nations and people that are currently unbanked.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our explanation of the Lightning Network, some technical stuff, some practical stuff, and some humanitarian stuff. So we're super excited to see where this technology leads us. But ultimately, it's going to help with the worldwide adoption of Bitcoin, which can only be good news for anybody listening to this show.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thanks for tuning in.
Catch you soon.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. It would mean the world to us if you could leave a review wherever you're listening. This really does help and allows other people to find us online. You can keep up to date with new releases of the podcast by subscribing and following us on Twitter or Instagram for the latest crypto-related news. Information provided by Cryptopulse via this podcast, website, social media channels, and any other medium does not constitute financial advice, investment recommendations, or any other type of advice whatsoever. The Cryptopulse team are not professional financial advisors. Trading and purchasing cryptocurrencies do carry risks, and anybody wishing to partake in such activities should seek professional advice.